Corsair, Apple Floppy Days, Commodore, Tandy Floppy Days, Atari, TI Floppy Days. The weekend comes, the disk drive hums, ready to code for you. These days we're all happy and free. Those floppy days, the games we play, you shared with me. Those days, Motorola, Intel 6502, graphics and text are there to view. Composite, color, or RGB, program fun for you and me.
Floppy Days is recorded in a live studio.
Inside PC Floppy Days, SD Amiga Floppy Days, Junior Sinclair Floppy Days, Classic Days, Microwaves, geeking all week with you. These days we're all happy and free. Those floppy days, the games we play, you shared with me. Those days, these floppy days are yours and mine. These floppy days are yours and mine. Floppy days.
The TRS-80 Model 3.
Introducing the Apple IIc.
Atari 1040 ST.
Commodore 64. What?
PC Junior, new from IBM.
Discover Atari.
It's at his Radio Shack Color Computer 3.
Introducing the Timex Sinclair 1000.
For computer, this is the one. Texas Instruments home computer.
The wonder computer of the 1980s, the Commodore VIC-20.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Floppy Days episode number 122 for January 2023. I'm your host, Randy Kindig. We're currently covering the very productive year for home computers of 1982. As regular listeners will know, we've been covering the ZX Spectrum and the myriad of information about that machine. While we still have more information to cover, such as emulation, websites, and a lot more, we're currently taking a tiny step backwards to pick up coverage of a machine that I recently acquired and wanted to talk about, but which came out in very late 1981. That machine is the Nippon Electric Company NEC PC-6001 and its US variation, the PC-6001A, or known as the NEC-TREK. It actually was released in November 1981 in Japan. Thus, you can see this is really a very small detour to go back and pick up this machine. It's one I didn't know about, honestly. And when I acquired a very clean, boxed version in the Great Barn Find of 2022, not only did I decide to keep the machine, but also to cover it on Floppy Days. I hope you can forgive me this minor detour off the path of covering the machines in the approximate order they were released. I think you'll find this machine interesting, as I did, and enjoy hearing about it. This is the second episode of a two-part arc on this machine, due to the amount of material we were able to pull together and the length of time it took to go through it. Last episode we covered history and tech specs, as well as a brief interview with my co-host, and this month we will cover the usual remaining topics. With me this month again to provide the co-hosting duties will be Carlos Camacho. Carlos lived in Japan for a while and has a great perspective on this line of computers, as well as a lot of experience and knowledge around Japanese computers in general, which I think you'll find interesting. The research he did on the PC-6000 line a few years ago was a tremendous help in pulling together information for this show. At the end of the day, if you have an interest in acquiring anything for this platform, you'll need the information that Carlos provides on how to navigate the Japanese vintage computer market. I know I learned a ton from Carlos. Very soon, we'll return to ZX Spectrum coverage. As usual, I will also talk a bit about a few new acquisitions beyond the barn find that have come my way, and in addition, I'll briefly tell you about upcoming shows of which I'm aware, and I'll share any feedback I've gotten. I hope you enjoy the show.
Konnichiwa, Carlos Tomoshimasu. Hi, this is Carlos Camacho. I'm a fan of Japanese vintage computers, and you are listening to the Floppy Days podcast.
Okay, now for new acquisitions and what I've been up to. First up is an IBM PC-5140 convertible display adapter. One of the machines I found in the Great Barn Find of 2022 was the IBM PC-5140 convertible. The PC convertible is a laptop computer made by IBM and was first sold in April of '86. It was really IBM's first laptop-style computer following the luggable IBM Portable, and it introduced the 3.5-inch floppy disk format to the IBM product line. Like modern laptops, it featured power management and the ability to run from batteries. Even though I'm not a big fan, period, of IBM and compatible machines, this one is somewhat interesting. The PC convertible came in 3 models: the PC convertible, the Model 2, and the Model 3. They all had LCD panels, for instance, with varying degrees of legibility of the screen, depending on which model you have. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail here on the PC convertible, as I plan to cover the machine when I get to 1986 in the timeline. Suffice it to say that the PC convertible had a unique way of expanding it through sidecars, somewhat like the PC Junior or the TI-99 4A, but from the back instead of from the side. As the LCD screen isn't that great, even though I'm not planning to keep this machine long term, I decided to purchase a video card sidecar that gives the machine the ability to connect to a composite monitor with an RCA jack or to a CGA monitor. You can connect the optional 5144 PC convertible monochrome display or the 5145 PC convertible color display via the adapter. Through the use of optional connectors or cables, the CRT display adapter, which is known as the 4020, also allows the attachment of the IBM 4863 PC Junior color display, which I have. That was another item that was in the barn find. Or you can use the IBM 5153 color display, which was made for the desktop, or a standard television set. Next up, I don't think I can have a show without talking about a new book that I've acquired, because I'm always getting a new book. But I'm really enjoying the series of books being published by Retro Reproductions. I've already talked about some of the books I purchased through Amazon by this publishing house. On Amazon, I find no less than 40 books they've currently republished for our retro machines. These are books that have been published recently, but are reproductions of books that were published back in the day. These range from the Commodore 16 to the Atari 8-bit to the VIC-20, the Spectrum, the ZX81, and many more machines. And I must say they're very reasonably priced, with most, if not all, running less than $20 and many under $15. Recently, due to my recent dropping of Amazon Prime, I needed an inexpensive filler item to get the total purchase over $25. After perusing a list of books by Retro Reproductions, I decided to order the book Spectrum Machine Language for the Absolute Beginner by William Tang. Each chapter includes specific examples of machine language applications which can be demonstrated and used on your Spectrum, as well as a self-test questionnaire. And at the end of the book, all this is brought together in an entire machine language program. So you're going from design right through to the complete listing of an exciting original arcade game. Okay, next up is the Commodore 128 Jiffy DOS. Another barn find, the Commodore 128D, is one I've already cleaned up and decided to add to my collection. In place of the regular Commodore 28 I had and have had for years. I've talked about the trade I did with the Commodore 128 for an Atari 1200 XL on another show. Since I decided to keep the 128D, every Commodore owner knows they need the Jiffy DOS ROMs for their computer in order to speed up the insanely slow disk access that plagues the original Commodore OS. You actually need a Jiffy DOS ROM in both the computer and the disk drive in order for this impressive speed up to work. Since the 128D has a built-in drive, this means purchasing a 2-ROM set. One of the first things I did after deciding to keep the 128D was to go over to Jim Brain's Retro Innovations table at VCF Midwest and purchase the necessary ROMs. I still haven't installed them, but I'll be doing that soon. Finally, in the category of what I've been up to, I'm currently in the process of researching, playing with, and ultimately doing some development with the Fast Basic language for the Atari 8-bit. Fast Basic is a relatively recent, the first version was released in 2017, basic interpreter and compiler for the Atari 800 XL XE line that's getting a lot of press recently. Not only is it perhaps the fastest BASIC available for the Atari platform, but it's extensible and has gotten some commands added recently to support the amazing and wildly popular FujiNet networking upgrade. That makes it relatively easy to develop multiplayer games that work over the internet. In addition, you can either do your development right on the Atari 8-bit or emulator, or there are cross-platform compilers for Windows, Linux, and Mac that allow you to develop on the modern platforms and target the Atari. My goals are around learning the language and developing a couple of FujiNet-enabled games. It's been some time since I did any real development, and I'm excited to jump back in at least a little bit. And that's it for new acquisitions and what I've been up to this month.
Hi, this is John Grant. I've wrote the BASIC and the other things in the ZX80 ROM. These days I'm working on things for 5G, new mobile, and trying to bring to today's digital systems something as new as we had back in the days of the ZX80. And you're listening to the Floppy Days podcast.
Okay, now for upcoming shows. Since we're very early in 2023, there are quite a few shows, 8 as far as I count right now that I know about that are happening this year. So I'm going to quickly run through these. First up, April's a very busy month. There are 4 shows in April. First is VCF East, April 14th through the 16th at the Info Age Science and History Museums in Wall, New Jersey. Next is the Commodore Los Angeles Super Show, actually that same weekend, April 15th through the 16th, at the Burbank VFW Hall in Burbank, California. Next up, the following weekend, April 22nd through the 23rd, is the 31st annual Last Cocoa Fest at the Holiday Inn and Suites, Chicago in Carroll Stream, Illinois. And the last weekend of the month, this is a new show. It's something I'm a part of. It's called the Indie Classic Computer and Video Game Expo, April 29th and 30th at the Crown Plaza Airport Hotel in Indianapolis, Indiana. In June 24th through the 25th, is the Pacific Commodore Expo Northwest version 4 at the Interim Computer Museum in Seattle, Washington. Next is Kansas Fest, the largest and longest running annual Apple II conference. It's July 18th through the 23rd at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri. The Southern Fried Gaming Expo is July 28th through the 30th in Atlanta, Georgia. And the Portland Retro Gaming Expo is October 13th through the 15th at the Oregon Convention Center. And that's it for shows that I'm aware of occurring in 2023. Okay, I have a fair amount of feedback to go through this month. This first one is a fairly long one, but I think it's good information and ties into the topic for this particular episode. It's from Khalid Yusuf. He says, "Thank you for talking about the NEC PC-6001 series, one of the first computers I ever used. I have a few comments. The Arabized variants of the NEC PC-6001 Mark II and Mark III SR were assembled and sold by the Iraqi state electronics manufacturer. These Iraqi variants were sold under the Warka line, W-A-R-K-A-A. Warka is the Arabized word for the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk. The NEC PC-6001 Mark II was labeled as Al-Warka 6001, and the NEC PC-6001 Mark II SR was labeled as Al-Warka 6002. The Iraqi state apparently was intending to make the PC-6001 compete locally in the Iraqi market against the more popular Saker computers, S-A-K-H-R, which were Arabized MSX computers assembled and sold by a Kuwaiti company called Al-Alamiya. However, Saker computers dominated the home computer scene in Iraq due to how popular MSX games were, and a large catalog of Arabic, edutainment, and other software titles developed and sold by Al-Alamiya. The Iraqi state, for some reason, did not bother to build a catalog of software for the 6001s they were Arabizing, assembling, and selling, and they did not foster a market to do that for them in the private sector. It could also be that the 8-year-long war with Iran was a major contributor, as most of the state's budget was spent on the war effort back then. Apparently there is an English variant of the NEC PC-6001 Mark II that the Iraqi computer engineers used as a stepping stone to get it Arabized, as opposed to directly Arabizing the Japanese version. That English version has no labels whatsoever, so I suppose they were more like prototypes that were not supposed to be sold in the market. I only confirmed its existence through pictures. Sadly, I could not get my hands on it due to how rare it is, but I'm trying to locate one. The ROMs in the Iraqi PC-6001s are different. It most likely has an Arabic characters ROM instead of the Japanese kanji ROM. I got my hands on a Warka PC-6001 and will attempt to clean it up and make it run and try to dump their ROMs. The Iraqi state also produced Arabized BASIC sold on cartridges. I got one of these specimens, but I couldn't get the ROMs inside it to work on the Japanese PC-6001 Mark II. I assume it needs the Iraqi PC-6001 instead. The Warkas are very rare computers and were only sold in Iraq. Despite their rapid obsolescence, they remained as an excellent option for anyone who wanted a cheap home computer in the 90s. Many of us could not afford modern PCs due to the international sanctions. Some Iraqi high schools had computer labs filled with Warka 6001 up until the early 2000s, where we were taught how to program with the basic language. Other than the Iraqi Warkas and the American TREKs and the mysterious English PC-6001 Mark II prototypes, there's also a Greek PC-6001 Mark II. It had Hellenic letters on the keyboard, but apparently it did so badly in Greece only a few were sold. Sadly, I do not have much information about it, but hopefully I can trace more evidence of it in the near future. Finally, the NEC PC-6001 Mark II SR had an FM synth music capability thanks to the Yamaha YM2203 chip inside it. You can find evidence of that in this video, and there's a link in the show notes. Pretty cool. I've recently created this website to document and archive my findings on the Iraqi Warkas, and it's Warka, WARKAA.org. It's still empty, but I will fill it with more juicy details gradually this year. Sorry about the long email, and thank you. Next up is an email from Todd Geiger. He says, I've enjoyed your Floppy Days podcast for many years now. I discovered the series about 6 years ago and have listened to them all. I've also enjoyed your contributions to the Atari Antic podcast and the TRS-80 Trash Talk series. Your participation in telling the story of the microcomputer revolution has inspired me to embark on a YouTube project that I think you may find interesting. Over the past year, I've been writing basic language programs to run in emulation on a variety of 8-bit microcomputer platforms that let these wonderful machines tell their stories in their own words. The series is called Computers in Their Own Words. I've created a YouTube playlist to watch these videos, and there will be a link in the show notes. In the descriptions for each video, they're about 5 minutes long each, I provided a link to your podcast that addresses the history for that machine. I was born in 1960, so video games and microcomputers were an important part of my teen years and early adulthood. I've spent the past 30 years or so as a software engineer. I currently work for Walt Disney Parks and Resorts in Orlando, Florida. In the opening of each video, I show photos of 12 vintage computers and replace them one by one with screenshots of programs running on them. This then fades to video of 12 emulators running simultaneously on my desktop PC. I'm fascinated by the advance of technology that allows me to simulate thousands of dollars of 1980s technology all at once on a single computer, and one that's 10 years old to boot. Thanks again for all you do, and I'm looking forward to your episodes covering the Commodore 64. Thank you, Todd. And finally, I have some feedback from Carlos, and this is not Carlos Camacho, this is a different Carlos. He says, greetings again from the UK. Thanks for mentioning Byte High No Limit and the Elite episode on your recent Floppy Days. I am really enjoying the subject of Japanese computers. Carlos's knowledge of the subject is so interesting, and it's great to get an understanding of a computer scene that was vibrant other than the UK and US computers that I'm more familiar with. My favorite Japanese computer hardware, solely for its name, was the Fujitsu FM Towns Marty, which was a console. Its name was derived from a Nobel Prize for Physics winner, Charles Towns. This deference is something I respect. It got me thinking, what other computers are named after notable people? I can think of one other. Maybe your listeners can think of some. I look forward to your next installment and more news of your great barn find. Yes, thank you, Carlos. Appreciate the contact there. Interesting question about computers named after notable people. I know that there was the Osborne computer, for instance, but other than that, I really can't think of many other examples. Maybe the listeners can. If you know of any, please write in and I'll talk about it on the next show. And that's it for feedback this month. Okay, now part 2 of the NEC PC-6001 and NEC-TREK with Carlos Camacho. Okay, peripherals. Let's go ahead and jump into peripherals. There were quite a few peripherals that are listed. My machine actually is a boxed NEC-TREK, so it's got all the original materials in it, and wow. it lists a lot of the of the peripherals that were available for purchase. Now, how easy it was to get them at the time it came out, I don't know, but they're listed anyway.
They always did that back in the day.
Yeah. The cassette recorder that we talked about, there was a PC-6082A cassette recorder for $99. There was a PC-6011A expansion unit, which was pretty interesting because it would actually give you 3 cartridge slots.
Right.
And it says that some of the cartridge-based games actually use 2 cartridges. So you would need 2 slots for that. And then there also was floppy disk I/O support from this expansion unit as well.
Yeah, I don't think the floppy disks were very common. Most Japanese probably didn't own it. They were very expensive, of course, in America back in the day. And in Japan, also very expensive, very large units typically. So not very common, I think.
Yeah, on my price sheet, it says that you could get a 5 1/4 inch single-sided double density disk drive for $550, which was considerably more than the computer itself cost, and it only held 143 kilobytes.
And ironically, probably made in Japan.
Probably. So I don't know how many people actually ended up ever getting the floppy. But any of the software that I came across, it was all either cartridge-based or cassette-based. I did not see any disk-based software at all.
Yeah, the vast majority when you're looking online. In fact, this morning I was looking online and I saw several games that were very interesting, all on tape.
So there were a lot of other peripherals mentioned on this price sheet. There's actually a joystick mentioned for $25 that matches the machine.
Right.
There's a 40. You have one of those? Oh,
I
cool.
might, somewhere.
There was a 40-character thermal printer with a Centronics interface.
I feel like just about every 80s computer was in a true
one of those
platform unless it had a thermal printer.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. There was an RS-232 communication card. There was, when they say a card, I assume that was a cartridge probably. I don't know where else. I
think it was like the Coco's RS-232 pack, program pack. It was like a cartridge with a DIN output.
There was, as I mentioned, there was an RS-232C connection on the back of the machine. So there was a cable you could get to connect to the printer, to the communication cards and a modem. And it sounded as though there was actually a modem that was available as well that actually matched the machine as well. Yeah, I'll bet it is.
I think when I think of the 80s, I think of people getting modems to go on BBSs, but I don't recall that being a huge thing in Japan when I was there.
There also was a digitizer graphics tablet available. Connects to both of the joystick ports. Had a pressure-sensitive surface for writing or drawing. So that sounds pretty interesting. It was retailed for $150.
And I think it came with a drawing art software as well. Yeah, so it's similar to the Coco's, I think it's called the XPad, or I could be butchering that name, but it's very similar to that.
And then there was a ROM-RAM cartridge. It served 2 functions. Yeah, do you have one of these?
I don't, I do see them come up on auction quite often, and I always get outbidded, so eventually I'll get one.
Yeah. So what this would do is increase the RAM to 32K, and it says it also allows for 2 custom ROMs to be loaded in the cartridge, which in theory can expand the functionality.
They're ZIF sockets. And so it's like a little green socket, which you just drop that EEPROM in and you push down the little lever to hold it secure in place and you're good to go. So yeah, definitely a little handy device.
I wonder how many of those ROMs were ever made, the custom ROMs to actually utilize for that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know.
Let's see here. It says no other official methods of expanding the system's memory exists. So if you wanted to use another cartridge, you had to buy this expansion unit.
And did you mention the touch screen?
I didn't. I was going to next mention that I found a couple places that mentioned there were 12-inch monitors, monochromatic or color, available, but I couldn't find any other details. So maybe you got more information.
I don't remember the model numbers themselves, but yeah, I do see them come up on auction every so often.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they are available. Although
so these match the computer. These are made.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, although probably most people didn't buy it just because of the cost. But I probably wouldn't buy one of those through the auction overseas simply because when it arrives, it's probably going to be broken.
We know how monitors travel.
Yeah, they just don't travel well, so I would probably stay away from them.
But you say they were touch monitors, touchscreen monitors?
Oh, there is a separate device which is plugs into the cartridge port, I think, or the joystick ports. I can't remember. But basically, you put that device over your TV screen or your monitor screen, and it turns it into a touch capable device.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so there was some software available that allowed you to touch the screen.
Well, that's interesting. That's something different, certainly.
Yeah, that was definitely something different, right? Ironically, I was just thinking, I don't recall ever seeing any light guns for these platforms. So I wonder if it's an American thing.
Well, maybe so, yeah. That touchscreen device was not mentioned in the brochure that came with my machine, so
I'll dig it up and I'll send it over to you.
Very cool. Okay, that's pretty much it for peripherals, unless you know of any others that might have been available, like that touchscreen device.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, I think you've covered all of them. Since those days, there are some modern devices available through hardware hackers and also projects on Git, and then projects that I come across on various blogs to expand the memory. I mentioned to also allow for more than one cartridge. I've seen some modifications that allow you to put the 32K inside the machine. So there's definitely some more modern gadgets that you can attach to it. I believe there's a couple SD card projects as well for storage. But again, you have to be crafty at Googling.
Yeah, you certainly do. You have to have a lot of Google foo. All right, let's talk a little bit about actually using the machine, pulling it out of the box and actually utilizing it, because that can be one of the intimidating things about a new machine. They all work differently. They all are somewhat different in the way they boot and what you have to do and how what questions you have to answer after you start it up and those sorts of things. So,
although actually the first thing we should mention, Randy, is so you've bought the TREK, so that's made for US. Right. So no problem, plug it right in. Yeah. Composite out, standard, that will go into a US TV. Now, if your listeners are buying this from overseas and they're getting the Japanese version, the PC-6001, we're talking about 100 volts rather than the US 110 volts. So now you can plug it in and it won't blow up on you, even though it's made for 100 volts. But I always like to err on the side of caution, and so I do have a step-down transformer when I use the Japanese version of it. Yeah, just you figure the electronics is pretty old and so forth. It just makes me feel safer. Also, video-wise, Japanese computers use the same NTSC signal as U.S. computers, so that's also compatible. You will find a lot of computers in Japan with their cord snipped off, so that's just a way of someone saying that don't use this computer anymore. But basically, we are vintage computer collectors, so of course we're going to buy them and put on a new power cable, and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. The fact that I didn't even realize Japan used 100 volts. I have a step-up transformer for my, or step-up, step-down, I guess both, for my British machines, for my European and British machines, because, they use different voltages as well.
Yeah.
But it's not made to take it to 100 volts, so I'm not sure what I would do if I had the 6001.
They're fairly inexpensive, the transformers.
Yeah. Okay, so again, this for me, this is the point of view is pulling a NEC-TREK out of the box. You might have some different things you might want to add, Carlos, for for a 6001 with checker keyboards and so on. But for the NEC-TREK, as I mentioned before, it's got a really nice keyboard. It's multicolored. It's based on ivory and brown with special orange keys as an accent. So it's always fun to see the colorful keyboard.
Definitely orange and brown. Just really, speak to us that this is a retro machine. Like you just don't find machines with that color combination anymore. It's kind of like a 2001 Space Odyssey type of vibe.
Yep. And just above the keyboard and to the left is the speaker, and directly above the keyboard and to the right side is the cooling vents on the top of the machine. Now I don't know that the top of the machine isn't large. I don't know if it's okay to put a monitor on top of it, directly on top of it.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't. I mean, the plastic can get brittle over time, so I'm not sure I would attempt that unless it were one of the modern LCD TVs that are, much less weight, pretty light. The NEC-TREK has a typewriter style keyboard, 71 keys, 22 of them are orange, and 49 of them are the brown that we talked about. In the box, when I opened the box up, there was a cassette cable, RF modulator, the NEC-TREK User's Guide, the NEC-TREK N60 Basic Reference Manual, a basic and extended basic quick reference, which is basically just a sheet, double-sided sheet, official order form, which had all of the peripherals and software listed on it that you could order from, and I wish I could order from today. And also included a NEC-TREK demonstration program tape. So you could load that up off tape. And it included the Canyon Climber cartridge, fully boxed and with the manual.
That's great. Now, so that Canyon Climber, that was programmed by Steve Bork. So that's pretty much the exact same version. Obviously it's the same video chip, so it's going to look the same as the Coco version, but with a bit better sound. Although Steve said it was pain in the neck to program it for the NEC. He also did the Megabug version as well, which you'll find in auction once in a while.
Oh, okay. You'll find the Megabug 6001 cartridge in auction?
Right.
I got to find out more information from you what auctions you visit, because on eBay I don't see much.
You're not going to find them on eBay, pretty much.
Okay.
You're going to have to go over to Yahoo Auction in Japan.
Ah, okay. All right. Very good.
And I've got some information on that later in the show to talk about how we go about buying computers from Japan.
Cool.
The easy way and then the hard way.
Awesome. I will definitely learn from that. I know that. As far as the ports go, so as I look at the machine, on the left side are the two joystick ports. On the back, so if I turn it around from left to right, there's a power cord, there's a power switch above that, there's a reset button below that, there's the printer port, then the serial cassette port, then the audio port. Actually, there's there's an audio port, there's an RF port. Yeah, there's the audio port, and then next to it is the RF port on top. In the middle, there's a channel switch, and on the bottom is the composite port, the composite jack. And then next to that is the RS-232C that I mentioned that has the plastic over it, so I can't actually utilize that. And then there's a volume control knob as well on there. So port-wise, that's everything that's on the NEC-TREK. Now, I don't know, is the PC-6001 any different in
No,
that
it's
regard?
not. It's pretty much the same. Yep, except all the ports will be labeled in katakana, the Japanese alphabet for that they use. So you'll see it will say sound out using katakana and perhaps some kanji characters as well.
That is one nice thing about this machine is that every single port is labeled.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true of all these vintage machines. Sometimes they're not labeled. Okay, hooking it up. You plug it in, put an optional cartridge or expansion unit, and disk driver cassette if you have that. Turn on all the peripherals first, and then you can flip it on using the power switch on the back. Now, as I mentioned, it will come up and ask you how many pages. Typically, you can, if you have 16K of RAM, your only answers are 1 or 2. If you have 32K, you can enter 1, 2, 3, or 4. Page 1 is, as we talked about, is a low resolution, and 2, 3, and 4 are for graphics, where page 1 is text. The higher the number of pages, the more RAM that's used. If you don't choose something and just hit enter, the machine defaults to 2 for 16K and 4 for 32K. Then it says Microsoft N60 Basic by Microsoft, copyright 1981, and then it will tell you the number of bytes free. And I know that on a 16K machine, that is 7,100 bytes, which isn't much.
Yeah, not much. And again, the screen is in the inverse display mode of the video chip, whereas on the Coco it's the black text on green. So a bit easier to read on the NEC machine.
Yeah, it is pretty easy to read. I mean, from what I see here, it's like a light green text on a dark green background.
Ah, yes, right. So I was going to say the Microsoft Basic, they name it N60 Basic. So you're going to find as you jump from NEC machine to NEC machine as they got better and better, they kept that. So you'll go to N66 Basic for the 6600 machines, and then N88 Basics and so forth.
So what's the N for?
Nippon.
Ah, okay.
Nippon.
Makes
NEC.
sense.
Nippon
Gotcha.
equals Japan. Yeah.
Oh, of course. Duh. It also, when you boot up the machine, it will list function keys along the bottom. Using BASIC, real quick, the built-in BASIC, as we mentioned, is a Microsoft BASIC. It's pretty nice. It's very
nice.
powerful. There's a screen editor, so you can move the arrow keys to move to line to line. So you can change and modify it if you want to in place. Syntax errors are only listed after the program is run. You can have any length variable name. It's funny because the manual says variable names can be any length. However, only the first 2 characters are significant.
That's correct. That's typical of, I think, all Microsoft Basics.
Yeah.
You can call the variable whatever you want, but it's basically just utilizing the first 2 characters.
Yeah. So you can use the longer variable names just for yourself if you want to.
Exactly.
But just be cognizant that you can't reuse the first 2 characters. You can have multi-dimensional arrays, which begin at element 0. You can get graphic symbols off the graph key. And with the Alt-Char key, you can get additional characters. And there's lots of special commands for sounds and graphics, and even special commands for each of the peripherals that I mentioned was available for the machine.
Yeah, I think one of the things that they did really smartly was the character set. So if you've seen the Coco's character set, you've got the alphanumerical letters and numbers, and then the semi-graphics blocks. But on the NEC, you also have how can I explain? It's similar to the CGA character set, where you have like little lines, so that you can use those little lines to create like long lines or like squares on the screen. Are you following me? Like it's difficult to explain, but if you see a picture of the character set on the NEC, it's quite different than the Coco's character set. So those lines are like you can make like dividers is what I'm basically saying. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you happen to be lucky enough to have the extended BASIC cartridge, and I don't know how easy that is to get, it's probably not particularly easy.
No, not easy. But you could probably obtain it and then burn it to a EPROM and build a board and plug it in without too much trouble.
There you go. We need to get somebody to make a run of those.
Eventually we will.
It still will ask you how many pages, but it also, well, I'm not sure if it asks you how many pages. Yeah, it does. Still ask you how many pages, but in addition, Extended BASIC will ask you how many files. So it's wanting to know how many files you want to access at the same time, with 15 being the maximum. And obviously, the higher number you choose, the more memory is going to be reserved for that. And if you don't enter anything, it defaults to 3.
Yeah, I always wondered why NEC went down that route to ask those questions, especially for someone who's, ahead of time, who's very new at using a computer. That could be confusing, intimidating. I don't know. Whereas a Coco, it just defaults to something, and if you want to change it,
you have to
can put in,
change it in the program, right?
Right, exactly. So I'm not quite sure the thinking behind that, but there must be some method to their madness.
Yeah, I'm like you. I mean, it's great, like on the Atari and the Commodore 64, when you boot them up, it just says, ready.
Ready.
And there you are. There's no questions.
Player one.
You are ready. So even the TRS-80 Model 1 would ask you questions when you booted it up, which I'm with you in that that's a little bit intimidating for a new user. The Extended BASIC also has some additional output commands, some additional graphic statements, and functions as well. Loading up software, you could use the matching or basically any cassette deck. I actually have not tried to load this cassette that came with this, but I assume I could just grab my Tandy cassette deck and hook it up and load in the software.
You should be all right. For other folks, you probably would want to go in the route with connecting your PC's audio output into the cassette and play like a wave. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually probably a better way to do it these days. Obviously, you could also use a disk drive, but again, I didn't see any software available on disk, or you could use a cartridge. Okay. That's information about turning on the machine and actually using it for the first time. Anything you want to add further there, Carlos?
I think it's a good summary of the experience of using the machine. For anyone who's used to using a Coco or a Dick Smith VZ computer, you'll feel kind of right at home.
These next two topics are things I could not find much information on at all. I like to typically cover, so for a lot of the machines, the Apples and Commodores and Tandy and so on, there were magazines that were produced specifically for that platform. And I had a horrible time trying to find anything like that.
Well, I can fill in the gaps.
Okay, perfect.
Right. Okay, so there was a specific magazine for this platform. It's called OPC, like OH, and then PC, the PC-6001. That's where they got the PC in the title. Okay. And there's a exclamation mark right after the PC, so it's OPC. Actually, the publisher published various magazines for different platforms, and they all started with the O. O, FM for the Fujitsu line and so forth. So that was specific, but they didn't cover just the 6001, of course. They covered all of the NEC models, so 6001, 8001, eventually the PC 8800 and 9800, not 1000. And then you had the big magazines that covered multiple platforms and, kind of our equivalents of Byte or Creative Computing magazine. And that's called I/O, as in input-output, with a slash between the I and the O. That's probably the biggest well-known magazine in Japan. And I'm a little bit addicted to that magazine. I will buy that magazine whenever I can. You'll find some on the Internet Archive, and they're full of type-in programs. And so you'll find type-in programs for all kinds of platforms. Some are basic games. Some are assembly language. So it'll take you a lot of time to input them in. But you'll find plenty of games for the 6001 and the I/O magazine. Highly recommended. Another magazine is called RAM, RAM, as in memory. That's not as thick as the I/O. The I/O is basically, if you were to get maybe 2 Byte magazines together and stack them up, or 3 Byte magazines, it's quite thick. And then the RAM, also very, very good magazine, covering multiple platforms. And finally, one more magazine, PIO, and I can't remember, maybe Pasocon for the P. I'm going to assume IO is for the input-output. That's also multi-platform, also a lot of type-in programs. It's worth mentioning also, beyond magazines, and when you get into books, there's actually a lot of books devoted to the PC-6001, and sometimes they divide it between half the content is for the PC-6001 and half the content is for the PC-8001. There's a lot of books. I have a lot of books in my library because that's my other passion, is collecting vintage computer books. I have quite a few. Yeah. Oh, really? That's great.
I've got books.
Yeah,
I've got hundreds of them.
and sure, you can get them on PDF, but there's nothing like opening up a, the giant computer games book and holding those. But yeah, you can definitely find a lot of the books. They're not, sometimes they're expensive, but for the most part, you can get them for $20. You can buy them on the auction sites in Japan, but also through Amazon Japan. And some of them will ship to you in America. Some of them won't, but yeah, that's another great source of getting type-in programs and learning more about the platforms. But of course, they're all in Japanese.
Oh, they're all in Japanese. Well, that would be a bit of a problem, wouldn't it?
Great reason for learning Japanese, but
I guess so. I mean, it's not a problem for you, but it would be a problem for me.
Well, yeah. The thing is, because of those magazines were generally aimed towards young people or teenagers, they tend not to use very high-level kanji or high-level Japanese characters. They tend to use more simpler Japanese, and in some cases, they use something called furigana, which is kind of spelling out what the kanji symbol is to make it easier for young people to be able to read the symbols. So, not undoable, but still there's a lot of images and photos in these magazines, so you'll get the gist of what they're doing or talking about.
Yeah, I saw. So of all the information that you had put together, I saw that you had a list in there somewhere of books.
Yeah.
For these platforms, so that was very helpful. I also found it at PC-6001.net. I found a list there as well. Yeah,
that's one of the foremost sites for this platform. It's a great platform. Yeah. There's a couple guys who also do a lot of tweeting for this platform as well, Japanese developers.
Oh, well, maybe you can share. Maybe you can share who those are.
Yeah, happy to do so.
When we get down to that section, maybe we can cover that as well. Okay, well, perfect. Yeah, like I said, I'd had a lot of trouble getting information about magazines and books, so I appreciate that. As far as software goes, there were several carts available in that flyer that came with my machine. It listed Canyon Climber. It mentioned Tumblebugs, Meteor Invader, Seamus, Slime, Chicken. Those are the ones that were listed there. I don't know. You mentioned Megabug. Maybe was another one.
That's Tumblebugs.
Oh, that's Tumblebugs. Okay.
Yeah. So Tumblebugs. That was going back to my trivia question. Tumblebugs, I believe, came out for the Apple first, and then it found its way over to the Coco. Got renamed to Megabug, programmed by Steve Bork. I thought it was called Megabug as well on the NEC, but my memory is foggy, so you might be right. Maybe they just went back to its original name of Tumblebugs.
Well, on the price sheet that I got, it did say Tumblebugs on there.
Oh, interesting. There are a couple other cartridges, some that were actually made by other developers, but they are extremely rare, and at the moment, I just don't remember their names, but I'll see them once in a while, but they'll go for crazy amounts of money.
I'll bet. Yeah. Now, I should mention, too, we've been talking about games on cartridge. That wasn't the only thing that came on cartridge. There were some other software because, they were trying to market this to the home market. So there was a micro painter cartridge. There was an electric pencil for word processing, music editor, the extended basic that we talked about already. There was an editor assembler, so you could write machine language programs. There was color calc for a spreadsheet, and teleterm for communication. So there were other non-game cartridges as well.
Right, and not so much cartridges, but on the topic of applications, it's another reason why you'll want to take a look at the I/O magazines, because there's a lot of application software in those magazines as well to type in, and often there are compilers in those magazines or different languages available, like Pascal or Modula 2 and so forth, or Forth. Yeah.
Oh, nice. There also was cassette software available. Seemed to be mostly targeted towards sports games or learning games for teaching the kids. Walt Disney software. There was Alphabet Soup. There was Strategy Football. So I don't know how many. Of the list I saw of about 200 pieces of software, I don't know how many of them were actually available on cassette versus cartridge, but I suspect a lot of them were on cassette. Is it pretty easy to get cassettes?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely they're on the auction quite a bit. But yeah, the quality of the games, they'll range. If we're talking about games, they'll range from really good to kind of mediocre.
Yeah, as far as software compilations, a couple places you can go to actually get software. The archive.org obviously is always a good place. They have a TOSEC. Yeah, and they have a TOSEC just for the NEC PC-6001. And there's lots and lots of software in that particular compendium. And then there's also one at also on archive.org. It's called Software Compilation Neo-Kobe. Neo-Kobe? It has a lot of software as well. So it's another compendium. It's another archive at archive.org that has a lot of PC-6001 software. Other places that you know of, Carlos?
Yeah, I'll come across games on various Japanese blogs. Sometimes they are posted by the authors that used to write for the magazine IO or OPC, and they'll put them up on their personal blog. So yeah, I mean, again, a lot of Googling to find these hidden gems out there. We mentioned magazines as a great source of typing in programs. We mentioned books. There's a book called Takahashi Harumi Game Library. You probably find it on Amazon. She's got a she's got a couple, and I don't know if the author is a her, but the book's name is after a female. There's a couple in that series, and they'll have like maybe 20 or 30 games type in, but also on cassette, I want to say. And then, of course, my Facebook page for Japanese Vintage Computer Group fans. People will post games on there as well. Games and apps.
Okay, excellent. Okay, let's talk a little bit about ads and appearances. So I did find, it was pretty hard to find very many ads for this series. I did come across a NEC-TREK ad, and it's actually for the NEC, specifically for the NEC-TREK, and it shows a father playing on a NEC-TREK with his son standing behind him wanting to use the machine. And at the top it says, "My dad bought NEC-TREK for all the wrong reasons." Apparently the dad was willing to use it for fun, and the son was willing to use it for homework and things like that. So it's a cute little ad.
You'll see when you get into these Japanese magazines, you'll see a lot of the ads for these platforms and the spokespeople. Just like we had Alan Alda and Bill Cosby, and we mentioned William Shatner already, and Asimov over in the States. Pushing computers, but over in Japan, each Japanese manufacturer also had their go-to spokespeople, very famous comedians or musicians that were pimping these computers on magazines and different media on TV and so forth. So if you dig hard enough, you'll come across a lot of those ads.
I also found a video ad, actually in Japanese, on YouTube. So it's pretty funny to watch that. I'll have the links in the show notes, but you can get it from archive.org, or you can go watch it on YouTube. It has English subtitles on it, so you know what they're saying. But they say "Papacon Pa" a lot in that particular video. Have you seen that video?
I probably have at some point.
It's cool. It's interesting to take a look at. But that's really all I could find as far as ad wise for the NEC-TREK. All right, the next topic is a really interesting one. I always love modern upgrades for the machines. You mentioned a few of these already a little bit when we talked about the peripherals that were available. Obviously when you've got a 16K machine, you're going to want to upgrade it to 32K. It's pretty hard to get to 32K ROM cards, 32K RAM card, as well as, if you want to use the ROMs that were available. or if you want a storage alternative like an SD-based or compact flash-based disk drive for the machine, those are both things that that you would want as well. And it sounds like people have taken a shot at making these sorts of things available, or at least putting the plans up for making them, but I've not seen that anyone has actually made them available, other than Nishida Radio did at one point in time build an SD adapter for the series, but they're impossible to get now.
Yeah, when we think of the scenario here in the States, people making a run of something, 20, 30 at a time. I usually don't see that over there, but maybe it's just that I'm not living in Japan anymore, and I'm not as connected as I once was. But they tend to just make the project available for folks to, do it on their own. So if you're handy, you can build these things. They're mostly not surface-mounted type of discrete components. So most people can solder them, I think. Eventually, I will start building a lot of these and selling them in my store. But you just have to Google to find these at the moment.
Well, I'll be first in line if you do that, Carlos. So, just so you know.
Great.
'Cause I would love to be able to upgrade these, and I haven't yet been able to find how to get some of this stuff. I'm not tied into the market as well as you are for actually buying the the real thing. Okay, that's it for modern upgrades, unless you know of any others besides RAM and ROM carts and SD adapters.
Well, I think that's that's the majority of what's available out there.
Next topic is emulation. So if you don't actually have a machine, you haven't acquired one, you want to actually play with it a little bit, you want to understand how it works and maybe run some of the software, see what it looked like. There are a few options out there, not a lot though, and a lot of them are not kept up to date. There's PC-6001V is a Windows-only emulator, but it's actually a DOS-based, as I understand it, a DOS-based emulator. So you'd have to have a retro machine just to run the emulator on. There's also PC-6001VW, which is based on PC-6001V. It's been ported, modified, and expanded to work in a Windows environment. Although, I think you can even get it for like Windows 10 today. There's IP6 and IP6 Plus, and there's NEC-TREK. But that one was for Windows 98 or newer. You can't even find information on that one anymore.
I'm going to assume that MAME also, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it can emulate the NEC or platform as well.
It can. I know I didn't put any information there, but I did look at that, and it can emulate the PC-6001. Yeah.
Right.
So, do you use any of these?
I don't. No. But I do remember also there was one emulator that wasn't in your list that actually does multiple platforms, but it's by a Japanese developer, so it's probably not well known to English-speaking audiences. And for the life of me, I'm sitting here Googling as we're speaking to try to remember what the name was, and I can't. I've got it buried somewhere in my Google Drive, I'm sure.
Okay.
So I will try to dig that up for you.
Yeah, if you do, great. We'll put the link in the show notes for that. I didn't try to play around with any of these. I am a Mac person. It looked like the only one that could possibly work on the Mac was maybe PC-6001 VW. One of these would also work, or was made to also work in a Unix environment. So I think you can actually compile it or do a make yourself and create a version that would run on a Mac. But I've got the real thing sitting here, so I don't need the emulator.
Yeah. I'm kind of a hardware guy. I like to use the machine as it was back in the day. Emulators just don't provide me the same type of enjoyment.
Yeah. Yep. Gotcha. All right, as far as buying one today, and we talked around it a little bit. The PC-6001 is fairly rare, at least here in the U.S. It sounds like it might not be as rare, other places that you can talk to. If you do want to get a 6001, they're almost all going to come from Japan. And the NEC-TREKs do seem to be pretty rare and would come from U.S. sources typically. And from what I've seen, if you're going to buy them at least from a U.S. source or from eBay, it's going to cost you $200 to $400 to get a NEC-TREK or a PC-6001. So
that sounds about
right. Carlos, I'm sure you can add to this.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Obviously recently, all vintage computers have just really increased in price. I don't know if it's due to everyone reaching a certain age and having a lot of free time, 80s kids, or the pandemic. But definitely the prices have increased. For me, typically I'm on Yahoo Japan auction. So, when we think of Yahoo, we think of Yahoo in the States as a search engine. And it's not very popular anymore. Google has surpassed it. But over in Japan, Yahoo always continued to do quite well as a search engine, but branched off into other areas, and specifically auctions. And so Japan Yahoo auction is the equivalent of our eBay. And so one way to purchase these products is to go onto that auction site and bid or try to snipe a auction. But for that, you need to know Japanese, and you need to have some kind of payment methods that are compatible with it. So that's quite a bit of work, and typically they won't send these products overseas, so you'll need to have someone forward the products over to you from Japan. Of course, if you're in Japan or if you're visiting in Japan, which I did in my last trip, I was there for 2 weeks. So I bought a bunch of things and threw them in my luggage, brought them back. Very cheap that way.
There you go. Yeah.
But for the rest of us, the best way to buy these products is through a freight forwarding company. And there's a couple out there that I'll mention. The first one is Buy. So Buy, B-U-Y, and then E-E. So Buy is probably one of the largest companies. There's another company called Zen Market. Another one called Jouse. I pronounce it Jouse. Could be pronouncing it wrong. J-A-U-C-E. And so the way they work basically is you go onto their site and you can do search, and you can do them in English. And they're basically going to search Yahoo's listings. And the interface on these sites are all in English. And so you'll be able to find the products. You'll be able to put in a bid. And if you win the auction, sometimes there's a buy button on there as well, so you could just buy the product outright. And of course, you can snipe the product. But anyways, if you win, they handle all of the transactional fees, and so they'll have that product shipped to their warehouse. And then from their warehouse, you can then have it surface mailed over or air mailed over to you. But if you're only going to, buy one product, it's not really economical. So typically what I'll do is I'll buy a bunch of stuff, and you can keep it at their warehouse for a certain amount of days. And then after a certain amount of days, they'll probably charge you some kind of fee. But let's say for 30 days, you can keep it at their warehouse, keep buying a bunch of stuff, and then you can ask them to consolidate all of the items. So they'll basically, unpack all of the items, get rid of all the extra, the original packing, and they'll repack everything together in one box. So now you're basically shipping one box rather than 20 separate boxes, which would be very expensive. And then you can have that. Typically, I have it surfaced mailed to me because I'm not in a rush to get the product, so it might take 2 months to get it. If you have a lot of money to spare and you want it right away, you can have it air mailed over to you. It's very expensive though. And so, yeah, these freight forwarding companies, they're the best way to get into Japanese computers. But the warning is the hardware itself, like I mentioned, to buy a computer, it's not very expensive. Like these PC-6001s, they're not rare in my opinion. So you can get them from like $25 to $99, amazingly cheap, for a retro computer. But, when you consider you're paying for the shipping to the warehouse of the freight forwarding company, then the freight company is going to kind of tack on some charge for the payment processing. And then they're going to tack on maybe some warehouse charge, and then they're going to tack on some consolidation charge, and then they're going to tack on another service charge for shipping it to you. So, there's a bunch of these small little charges that, you're originally thinking like, wow, I got this vintage computer for only $25. Yahoo, but by the time you finish shipping it all and paying all the shipping fees, it's now up to $400, sometimes $500. So it can quickly balloon. So again, you should really try to consolidate as much as possible, and you should avoid buying anything that's really heavy. And unfortunately, these 6001s, they're quite heavy. They're beefy computers compared to, let's say, some of the MSX systems that are very lightweight. So hopefully that all made sense. We can add that information into the show notes. So definitely, yeah, you want to use a freight forwarding company.
Yeah, that is great information. I probably will try to use this to to get a few things, because there are a few things I'd like to get for this machine since I've decided to keep it.
It's a great way to expand your collection or add to it. Mm-hmm. If you use Reddit at all, more than likely you'll probably find some people in those type of social media sites that will talk about these freight forwarding companies and recommend one over the other. They all have their different type of fee structure, and I tend to bounce around between a couple different ones just based on what kind of deal I can get from them and who's charging me the least amount of service fees.
Okay, excellent. That's fantastic information. All right, let's jump into community a little bit. What if you want to find out more about these machines? You want to talk to other people who use the machines. You're having a problem. You want to post it. Where do you find people who know about these machines? And there are several forums out there. I'll let you talk about the Facebook one because I know you are the one that created it.
Right. Yeah. So I created that Facebook group because I felt that there's a lot of forums out there for the Coco, for TI, Atari, Commodore, so forth, but I wasn't finding a lot of love for these Japanese platforms. Sometimes you'll find it on Atari Age, or sometimes on the Vintage Computer Forum. You might see one of them posts pop up, but not a whole lot. So I did create this Facebook group to try to consolidate as much information and bring people together. And it's been going on for a couple of years now, so building up a little community there. So that's a great place to go. And we mentioned Atari Age, Vintage, Computer Vintage Forum, Bulletin Board. That's probably another good spot. And of course, Reddit. And then beyond that, Twitter. I mentioned there's a couple different developers who post quite a bit. Off the top of my head, I don't remember their handle, but they're out there if you search for PC-6001.
Okay. Well, the final topic we've got here is around websites. So, based on the research that you did, Carlos, and the research I've done, we've got a set of links here that you can go to if you want to find out more information about some of the things that we've talked about. There's not a ton of them. Typically, when I'm talking about a machine, there are so many different websites you could go to get information that, you could have a really long list. And I think here I've got 10 things listed, so it's not a huge amount. But I did come across, and maybe you're familiar with it, Carlos, a shop in Japan called the Beep Shop.
Yeah.
That sells a lot of this stuff. I mean, when I went on their website and every page had to be converted or translated from Japanese to English so I could tell what it was saying. But I mean, all of these things that we talked about, a lot of the peripherals and software and so on, they had available, and the prices were like, are you serious? They're like $25 or $50 for this thing. I mean, it was really inexpensive. And now I know why, right? Because it's not easy to get it over here, even if you did buy it. But are you familiar with that place?
Yeah, it rings a bell. There are still these nostalgic vintage computer or vintage gaming retailers in Japan. If you're going to Japan, the mecca for all of this is in Tokyo in Akihabara. It's not what it used to be, during the 80s, but they're just full of shops that sell video games and vintage electronics, and you will come across vintage computers as well. On the other side of the country in Osaka, there's Den Town, Den meaning electric, so I guess electric town. So that's like, a couple different streets all together with retailers selling computers and vintage computer stuff and vintage gaming, and just basically it's electronics haven, these areas. So they do exist.
That sounds like fun.
It is. I mean, you could literally spend your entire day there, and some of the shops are quite huge. So we're talking about multiple floors, but then some of them are tiny, like a little cafe size establishment that you can go into and find the most, rarest of things.
Yeah, wow. I'd love to spend several days at some place like that. That sounds awesome. Okay, a few other links that might be helpful if you're looking for information. There was a write-up of the PC-6001 at the 82 Consumer Electronics Show, and it's on archive.org. There's also a write-up of the PC-6001 in March 83 Byte magazine, also at archive.org. I've got a link that just does a general search for PC-6001 at archive.org. There are a couple of videos on YouTube. One is Obscure System Showcase 10 Games for the PC-6001 by Sheropoulos. And there's another one called PC-6001 NEC's Home Challenger by Re-Enthused. So there are a couple of videos there you can take a look at. There is the PC-6001 series portal site, p6ers.net.
Yeah, it's a great site.
p6ers.net. It seems like there's a lot of information there. There is some PC software, some WAV files for a real machine, and .p6 files for an emulator at inofudo.web.fc2.com. Don't worry, the link's in the show notes. And then there's also 6001.net that I mentioned, PC6001.net, and retropc.net has some information as well. So, any other sites that you know of, Carlos, besides those that are great?
there's probably two other ones to mention. There's 2Channel, but I don't remember the URL. 2Channel is kind of, it's like a bulletin board that covers just basically A to Z of life. And they have a channel in there specific to computing. And then if you dig even deeper, you'll find people posting specifically about different vintage computer platforms, but the translation is not very good if you translate it over to English. But you can find links to other sites through 2Channel, which is what I find interesting. There's another site. It's basically a site for downloads. What was it called? You're a Mac user, right? Do you remember versiontracker.com? Versiontracker.com long ago, back in the day of Mac, it used to be a site that you could go to download freeware or open source. Actually, not so much open source back in those days, but and then demos and so forth. Specific for the Mac, I think they expanded to Windows now. But basically, the site is called Victor, or Vector. I should say Vector. Vector Co.jp, so vector.co.jp. So this is a site that people will upload freeware and other different type of programs and games and applications. So again, it's in Japanese, so you'll need to translate it through Google Translate, which is getting better and better and better, by the way. But it's still very difficult to translate Japanese. But anyways, you'll find some software on there as well.
Okay, great, excellent.
Yeah, ultimately, if you need advice on where to start, come to Facebook, join my group.
There you go.
We'll put you in the right direction.
Your Facebook page, at least for English or for American users, is probably the first place to go, right? I mean, that seems to be the most active in terms of these Japanese computers.
You'll get your responses quite quickly, and a lot of the people who are on there, the veterans, are people who have been buying Japanese computers for some time, and they know quite a bit about the platforms.
Okay. I think I said the last section was the last one. This is actually the last one. Just wanted to mention a few of the references that were utilized in pulling together all this information. Wikipedia, of course, is always a good source of information. There is NEC-retro.org has a lot of information about NEC's entire line of home consoles and home computers. There's old-computers.com, giantbomb.com, oldcomputers.net. WikiWand has a nice article on PC-6000 series. There's we've talked about all the information that you've curated, Carlos, about the PC-6001. You've got a Google Drive. I don't know if you're planning to leave it available that way or make it available some other way. Is it okay to provide the link in there for that, or?
Probably not at this point. I'm still working on curating it, cleaning things up, and I still have a lot more information that I need to move into those folders. Eventually, I will make all of that information public and either post it to the Internet Archive, or I'm going to be setting up a site and translating more of that and organizing it better. Right now, it's just such a mishmash that probably best not to post a link yet.
Okay. And then there is, I also provided a link to Atari Age forum, Atari Age thread that I think I know you posted in a lot. Somebody who posted, I now own and am baffled by a Japanese NEC PC-6001.
I remember that post.
And there's a lot of information just in that. If you just follow that thread, there's a whole ton of information.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Well, that's it. That's it, Carlos. I think we've covered the entire machine. I mean, that's not bad. It only took us 2.5 hours, right?
Yeah, that's not bad. I think, there's a whole world of retro computing in the States and also, over in Europe. And of course, we can't leave out South America. But, what I really want to have come across to your listeners is that there's just an incredibly interesting world of retro computers in Japan that didn't necessarily make it over to America, that, there's just so much interesting parts about the platformers over there, from Casio's crazy machines that they made to Toshiba's unique machines to the Fujitsu line, which I keep going back to just because it's, to me, if you're going to start collecting anything, the Fujitsu FM7 would probably be my choice. They're available. The support is wonderful. You can get the products for it. So yeah, a lot of interesting things that were going on there before the MSX, boom came across and kind of wiped it all out, kind of like that PC era that we talked about in the States. So hopefully we can get more people interested in these machines.
Yeah, there's a whole world there that I was not even aware of until I happened across this machine in the barn find. So unlocked a whole new set of information to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, your rabbit hole is going to lead you to the Tommy Puta and the Bandai computer, right? It's the Gundam, the giant robots themed machine, and then also My Holy Grail, which is a sword, SORD machine that has an absolutely fascinating history behind it. Sword Company. Can't recommend that platform enough. And of course, Sega has a PC as well. And the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole world there that you could certainly spend a lot of time. And that's something that I have to admit, I've been to a lot of computer shows, and it's not something that you see well represented, at these shows. MSX is somewhat popular. You'll see those, at the shows. But beyond that,
I agree
you don't
with
see
that.
anything else.
Right, and that's one of the reasons behind eventually setting up my store. In the near term, it's probably going to focus on the Coco, but eventually, I'll expand the store to these other platforms and set up sites to support these other platforms as well, to have people exchange information and keep this history alive.
Perfect.
Yeah, you're doing a fantastic job. I mean, I of all the shows I listen to, I gotta say, I get the most pleasure out of your show. And yeah, you covered the APF machine, right?
Yes. Yeah. A long time ago, but
I remember you covered that long ago. And there was another one that was like really out there. Was it the Video Genie?
Yeah, covered that as well.
Covered that as well, right? Yeah, I really, really enjoyed those shows. I mean, it's just like the more out there, the more rare, the better.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was wondering. So that's what you liked about it, was the fact they were machines that no one knew much about, and they're rare.
Absolutely, I think you covered the Sorcerer as well.
Yeah, sure did.
Stuff, right? Yeah, so I love. Yeah, to me, it's like, you can find information about Commodore everywhere, or Atari everywhere. When you're talking about those platforms, there, it's just like most people wouldn't even known they existed unless they heard your show. So that's great.
That's why I think this show will be popular, because this is a machine that nobody in the U.S. is going to know much about. So
yeah. Well, probably the prices will all start going up after the show.
Right.
But seriously, if you need help, ordering things, or if you need more information about it and get more fun out of it, let me know.
I will definitely do that, because, like I said, I'm going to keep it, and I'd like to get a few things for it before I...
I might have some books also that that I'll share their titles with you that you may want to check out.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, good.
Carlos, I want to thank you so much. It's been
my
been
great
wonderful.
pleasure. Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Very
I'll
good.
catch you later. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
See
Have
ya.
a great night. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Okay, that concludes our coverage of the NEC PC-6001 and NEC-TREK. One thing I wanted to mention, Carlos and I were talking after recording the episode, and one thing we wanted to address is we may have left the impression with our listeners that the NEC-6001 series didn't do so well. It didn't do well in the US, but in reflection, it had a large market share compared to Fujitsu and Sharp offerings in Japan. So, from that perspective, it was a major platform, at least in Japan. It's important to consider that platforms like the Commodore 64 and the Coco, etc., stayed on the marketplace for a long time. There may have been tweaks between models, but the machine pretty much stayed the same for several years. Whereas Japanese companies constantly updated their machines, coming out with radically new models almost annually. Okay, I want to give special thanks to Carlos for his help with this podcast. He sent me tons of information about the PC-6001 platform and allowed me to use information he had researched a few years ago, as well as being an excellent co-host with his ability to provide interesting color about the platform and buying Japanese computers in general. I provided links in the show notes for all the great websites we discussed during this podcast. Just go to floppydays.com for the full list. Also, I very much encourage you to provide feedback for the show at iTunes or on the website, via email at floppydays@gmail.com, via Twitter at floppydays, on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/floppydays. I'm also available now on the Twitter-like Mastodon platform at floppydays at oldbytes.space. Floppy Days is also available for streaming at Stitcher.com and on Spotify as well. Until the next show, pull out a vintage computer and compute as if it were yesterday. Bye.